chungus, big chungus, big chungus.
Today we are ranking the albums of Dream Theater, starting from the beginning with When Dream and Day Unite in 1989. This is the only album with Charlie Dominicini, and I guess it's sort of a transitional record from when the original project was called Majesty. I can definitely hear the differences. It does feel a little bit sort of like Rush meets the melodramatic power ballads from the likes of Journey. Not bad, but kind of corny. This is also just not my vocal style, so the more instrumentally focused moments and tracks like Itsy Jam and Light Fuse and Get Away are definitely more my speed. Yeah, not really my thing. Not bad, but it's going to okay. It's all subjective, by the way.
Move this man!
Next up is Images and Words in 1992. So here we get longtime vocalist James Labria stepping in. Supposedly they auditioned like 200 people till they scooped him up from a glam metal band called Winter Rose. Definitely a fan favorite album. I can hear the shift to a darker tone, though still with some of that power ballad energy coming back on tracks like Another Day, complete with some very Kenny G sounding saxophone. Also dig James' pretty over the top performance on Take the Time and the very technical parts of Under a Glass Moon. Pull Me Under is definitely a classic for a reason. Excellent song. Fun fact though, this is apparently the band's only top 10 hit in their entire career. And then of course there's the epic Metropolis Part 1, The Miracle and the Sleeper, which is all around amazing from the synth to the bass. Now I have to admit, I didn't love this one on my very first listen when I was first kind of like really digging into these albums, but it seems to grow on me with each revisit, especially coming back to it this time, I would say. And I agree that front to back, this is definitely one of their most cohesive and important works, so it is going to perfection. Next up is Awake in 1994. I really dig the opening with just Portnoy's drumming and then slowly adding the other layers of groovy bass and synth. This one really had me thinking about 2112 with that intro, but then James comes in and ruins it a bit for me with a corny kind of rock and roll energy. I know that this is also a fan favorite, but my enjoyment of this one is pretty sporadic. They'll get me with a great prog section as with Erotomania, but then lose me with the schmaltz of an Innocence Faded or Scarred. The Mirror has some spooky vampire organs and a fun chug to it. Lie also has some nice heavy riffs and a killer guitar solo, maybe a touch of Faith No More energy on that one. This was also notably released right as grunge was becoming the dominant trend in music, which might have had some connection to what the label saw as subpar sales. It did hit number 32 on Billboard 200 though. There are moments on this album I do enjoy better than the previous one, but it's less consistent overall, which is why I dropped it down to amazing. They follow that up with Falling Into Infinity in 1997. That's alright, I'm okay. It happens every single day. This is post Kevin Moore leaving on keys with Derek Sherinian stepping in for this and his only album. Due to the lower than expected sales of the previous album, the label was really pressuring them for a more widely accessible outing, and as we all know, that rarely goes to plan. It starts off pretty strong though with the lengthy opening of New Millennium with a very groovy head-bobbing bass line and more slowly building layers of instrumentation. Unfortunately, it just kind of goes to hell after that. You Not Me is like a crappier version of a Stone Temple Pilots song. Peruvian Skies is kind of like a less interesting take on Pink Floyd. Then there are other songs so bland that they aren't even really worth mentioning. There's honestly not a single song on here that I really enjoy, save for maybe just Let Me Breathe, which is still just kind of okay. I would go so far as to say that this album is just kind of not good. It's my least favorite one to listen to of the bunch by far. Fortunately though, that brings us to Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory in 1999. Now this is also where the legend Jordan Rudess joins the band on keys, and I gotta say that the first time I listened I was pretty nervous at the opening. Very strong Dark Side of the Moon vibes on that intro, but not in the best kind of way. But fortunately Overture 1928 quickly kicks in and put that smile back on my face and my concerns aside, and I'm talking again about like the very first time I listened to this. Strange Deja Vu has some truly amazing hooks with those proggy little start-stop patterns that I'm such a sucker for. I can hear the influence that this has had on bands like Opeth and Enslaved in particular.
Subconscious strange sensations.
And even some of the softer moments have more of an emotional weight behind them that cuts through the potential cheesiness that this band sometimes runs into for me. Plenty of great instrumental sections as well, thinking about the Middle Eastern sounding intro to Home or the surprise ragtime piano on the Dance of Eternity. Of course, this album also has to go to perfection. Then we got 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence in 2002. So I am not a big proponent of double albums, but this one is quite solid. It kicks off on a sick note with The Glass Prison, which in addition to being a great track at almost 14 minutes, deals with Portnoy's recovery from alcoholism. Master of Puppets and Rust in Peace were listed as influences among other things, and I can definitely hear that coming through along with just a touch of Faith No More. Again, was not expecting that record scratching part though.
How do you do, fellow kids?
In the other direction, I hear influences of this album coming through on Colors 2 for Between the Buried and Me. Blind Faith has some mild Tool vibes mixed with Alice in Chains, which were also reported influences. War Inside My Head and The Test That Stumped Them also slap. There's some mildly down moments, but overall, I really enjoy quite a bit of this, and still it holds strong on the revisits. I still think that they could have trimmed it down a bit, but it's already like 75 to 80% strong material. It is going to amazing. Then we have Train of Thought in 2003.
Take me as I am. As I am.
Here, Dream Theater set out to make their heaviest to date, according to Portnoy, and while that is likely true, it also ends up being kind of frustrating, and a lot of that has to do with James. As I Am is a solid opener from an instrumental standpoint, but the vocal lines are pretty lame, if you ask me. We have Alice in Chains at home with a Dr. Seuss rhyming scheme, is the way I think of it. Expect more of this throughout, unfortunately. The Dying Soul has some incredible drumming and downright modern-day Slipknot-worthy riffs, but also a cringy sort of pseudo-rapping section to it that takes me out of it.
Oh god, how embarrassing.
Endless Sacrifice, for all of its epic synth orchestration, ends up just reminding me a lot of how bad 2000s radio butt rock is out there. Same for Honor Thy Father, which is often pretty generic guitar work, and James straight up sounding like Kid Rock at some points.
You took advantage of an outreach hand and pushed it into me to ever in need.
Stream of Conscious is strong, even more so due to the lack of vocals. Ultimately, I think that a better vocal performance would elevate this thing to like a 9 out of 10, and it feels like people are just giving it a pass to the higher tiers in spite of that. I'm going to split the difference between the mostly strong instrumentation and dog water vocals and put it at good tier. I know this is probably one that people are going to be pretty pissed off about, but hey, this is just my opinion. Feel free to share your own in those comments. Hit the like button if you're enjoying the video, and hit the dislike if you dislike. But moving on, we have Octavarium in 2005. This album cover is the one I most associate with Dream Theater for whatever reason. It did manage to hit high on the charts in several countries and was largely praised by critics right from the start. I guess each song is in a different key, which is where the title comes from. Personal favorites here: The Root of All Evil, Sacrifice Sons, and Never Enough, even if at times it sounds like it's almost ripping off Muse's Hysteria, which had come out just 2 years prior. I do find myself wishing more of the band's songs sound like Panic Attack, which is easily one of, if not my favorite, of their entire discography. This is heavy Dream Theater done right. Kind of uneven overall, I'd say. The highs are high, but the lows are dull, and I'd argue make up more of the album overall. So this one is going to great tier. They followed that up with Systematic Chaos in 2007. And hey, it's been a while since I referenced Rush, but again, this opening for The Presence of Enemies, need I say more? Great track, by the way. Awesome songwriting, lots of great ups and downs, very dynamic, very engaging. Speaking of which, lots of fun technical proggy parts like on Constant Motion and The Dark Eternal Night. Rhythm Magazine actually voted this one of their best drumming albums of all time. I was shocked to see a number of people call this one boring. Like, I'm not a big fan of the slower parts or some of the vocals, especially the obvious Hetfield impressions, but even so, I find most of this to be pretty energized and engaging. So maybe another hot take here, but I am putting this one at amazing. Then we have Black Clouds and Silver Linings in 2009. This was initially Portnoy's final album. Lyrics mostly centered around difficult moments the band members have faced in their lifetimes. Cool dramatic opening on A Nightmare to Remember with the chorals and organ, all around solid song. A Rite of Passage has a nice stomp to it. The Shattered Fortress feels a bit like a continuation from the previous album, and pretty strong closer too with The Count of Tuscany. But another one with lots of dull portions too, unfortunately, and I don't care who this pisses off, but Wither sucks, man. This song is garbage. It's like when you're watching the movie about the guy and the girl that everyone wants to be together, and then the thing happens where they break up and there's the montage of them missing each other. This is the song that plays in the background. Another one with some great moments, but just not super memorable as a whole, and so for me, this one lands at good. Then we got A Dramatic Turn of Events in 2011. On the Backs of Angels continues the trend of really great openers with more choral and atmospheric elements transitioning into Rudess absolutely killing it on the keys. Him, Mike, and Petrucci's interplay on Lost Not Forgotten is pretty incredible as well. By the way, little aside, you should check out Rudess's contribution to the last Torrential Downpour EP if you'd like to hear his style mixed with some sort of like Dillinger Escape Plan vibes. Build Me Up, Break Me Down has some really heavy and infectious guitar hooks, and Bridges in the Sky gets my head banging after first turning my head with the throat singing, and both Outcry and Breaking All Illusions are both masterful prog compositions on the lengthier side. I saw some people ranking this one lower, but it was another one that I enjoyed almost start to finish, save for a few milder tracks like This Is the Life and Far From Heaven, and it has a lot of strong writing and performances, so this one made it all the way to fantastic. Which brings us to Dream Theater in 2013. Another cool symphonic intro, although at this point it's not quite as special to hear it. The Enemy Inside is a really tight banger of a track though, with a wicked conclusion. Enigma Machine may be one of their best instrumentals to date. Surrender to Reason has some great synth parts and a great kind of dueling bass and guitar part in the second half that I just love to death. I'd say the first half is slightly better than the second, but thanks to the shorter track lengths, no song really overstays its welcome. And then on the flip side, the 20-plus minute closer, Illumination Theory, is quite awe-inspiring. Honestly, another increasingly consistent runtime. I got some hate for putting this so high last time, but much like with the previous record, I would say that this is among their best as a complete work, even if it doesn't have those big standout singles. So I am still keeping this one high at fantastic. Then we have The Astonishing in 2016. Oh boy, another double album, but this one even longer than the last one with 34 songs and over 2 hours long, but there is some good stuff here. The intro to this one goes full Mr. Crowley, which honestly is kind of the whole album in terms of its massive sound. It reminds me on some level of Queen's A Night at the Opera, although not as good. We even get some bagpipes, but even with all the great instrumentation, I feel like James is the star of the show here. Lord Nefarious has a cool vibe, 3 Days has some great ragtime piano again, an evil jazz man delivery. A Life Left Behind also has a great piano part, killer synth and guitar shredding on Moment of Betrayal and The Walking Shadow. It definitely gets cheesy and a little up its ass with its grandiosity, but on the other hand, it flows pretty well. The diversity of styles and shorter songs keep things interesting. It would make for a great Broadway musical, but man, as an album, the thing is admittedly overly long and bloated. To its credit, I wouldn't call it a complete slog, but it certainly is a deterrent when it comes to thinking about repeat listens. I would probably axe a lot of the slower parts that I find boring, but obviously that would kind of wreck the storyline. Plenty to criticize here, but overhated if you ask me, but yeah. In their discography, it's still pretty low for me. I am going to put it at okay. And we got Distance Over Time in 2019. So hey, less than an hour for this one. They must have been tired after the previous record, but joking aside, I was thankful for that. It kind of reminds me of when Mastodon followed up Crack the Sky with the far more streamlined Once More Round the Sun, and to me, that's a compliment rather than an insult. Untethered Angel gets right into it with more excellent guitar, synth, and drumming precision. Paralyzed definitely has a more straightforward hard rock edge to it that I really enjoy. Lots of heavy vibes in general, from Fall Into the Light to the super crunchy groove of Room 137. S2N is a really great bass hook. At Wit's End and Pale Blue Dots stand out as well with those raging guitar riffs and proggier elements. I'm guessing that this one gets hate for being less prog in all caps, because that point aside, I think this is another kind of underrated and well-written gem. And it may not be as impressive, but it's very enjoyable, so I put it at great tier. Then we got A View from the Top of the World in 2021. Opener Alien feels almost like a message right from the top to the listener of, don't worry, we are still a prog band. The lyrics are pretty corny, but the songwriting is so good that I just don't really care. And really every track here has something to offer, from the almost melodic death metal riffs and panic attack-ish pace changes of Answering the Call, to the killer synth organ and, like, again, ragtime piano of Sleeping Giants. Then there's the vaguely Opethy sounding sections of Invisible Monster, the absolute banger intro and infectious grooves of Awaken the Master, and then another 20-minute epic closer that scarcely wastes even a second of its runtime. Even the upbeat major key Transcending Time manages to creep right up to the cheesiness line and instead come off as fun and uplifting instead, in the vein of Boston. Also thinking of like Moving Pictures era Rush or even Coheed. Hell, I could even imagine Danny Sexbang guesting on this one. All in all, I still think that this one is one of their most consistent and impressive albums to date, which caused quite a few longtime fans to get upset with me at the time that this released. Curious how they feel going back to it now though, because I'm doubling down and putting this album in perfection.
It's the children who are wrong.
But that brings us to Parasomnia in 2025. Mike Portnoy returns on drums here for their 16th album with songs centered around abnormal sleep behaviors. Love the opener In the Arms of Morpheus, even though it's fully instrumental. It builds from that eerie backtrack into a full-on gent riff, punctuated perfectly by the alarm clock and Portnoy's tom fills. Genius. After that is lead single Night Terror with that killer guitar hook and more standout drumming, but then things get really wild about halfway through with the synths and soloing. A Broken Man, on the other hand, is kind of all over the place in true prog fashion. It's super heavy in places, drifty in others, and then breaks out into a jammin' guitar and piano solo seemingly out of nowhere. Love the saxophone that opens up Dead Asleep, though I'm not sure how much it fits the rest of the track as a whole. I feel like it kind of sets the wrong expectation in some ways. Solid track still, but not one of my favorites overall. But Midnight Messiah is probably my favorite single. This is an all-around banger of a track with killer riffs and a really fun chorus.
Midnight Messiah.
Bend the Clock, on the other hand, is by far my least favorite track here, dipping into a more sappy, saccharine place. Solid performance from James, but too 80s dentist office waiting room for my taste. Fortunately, though, we still end strong after that with the Shadow Man incident. Another mammoth of a track, opening with a little music box before ripping into that sick heavy metal riff and once more getting very Rush with the keys. Love the pace changes around the 7-minute mark too, and another killer piano solo for Jordan. Everything said and done, this is another really impressive late career release for the band that only continues to hone their songwriting and skills tighter and still brings the pain when it wants to. I don't like it as much as a whole in comparison to the previous record, but it's honestly not too far behind. I am going to put this one at fantastic. Y'all check out this playlist for more progressive metal tier lists, or this one for your personal YouTube recommendation. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.